The interview was supposed to focus on small business owners who had adapted during tough economic times. Ellen DeGeneres was highlighting entrepreneurs who had found creative ways to serve their communities while keeping their businesses afloat. She'd already talked to a restaurant owner who started a community garden and a bookstore owner who began hosting virtual story time for children. But when she noticed a woman in row 11 who had the telltale signs of working with flowers, a slight stain on her fingertips, and the careful way she held her hands, she had no idea that the next few minutes would reveal one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking stories of anonymous compassion she'd ever encountered. "Ma'am, do you work with flowers?" Ellen called out, pointing to a woman who appeared to be in her mid-40s. "I can see what looks like flower stains on your hands." The woman looked down at her fingers with a gentle smile, then back up at Ellen. She had warm hazel eyes, shoulder-length brown hair with streaks of gray that caught the studio lights, and the kind of serene presence that suggested someone who found peace in creating beauty. "Yes, I do," she replied, her voice soft but clear. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I own Rose Garden Florist downtown." "Sarah, how long have you been a florist?" 15 years now. I opened my shop after my divorce, and it's been my life ever since." Ellen walked closer to Sarah's row, intrigued by something in her demeanor, a combination of joy and melancholy that suggested there was more to her story. "What's your favorite part about being a florist?" Sarah's expression became more thoughtful. "I love that flowers can change someone's entire day. A simple bouquet can turn grief into comfort, loneliness into joy, or despair into hope." The studio audience made appreciative sounds, but Ellen sensed there was deeper meaning in Sarah's words than typical business pride. "Sarah, it sounds like you really understand the emotional impact of flowers." "I do, and that's actually led me to do something outside of my regular business that's become very important to me." Ellen tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Sarah paused, seeming to consider how much to share. "Well, during my regular business hours, I sell flowers for celebrations, weddings, birthdays, anniversaries. But at night, I take flowers to people who need them most but could never afford them." The studio began to quiet as people understood that Sarah was describing something beyond typical florist work. "Where do you take flowers at night?" "Hospitals. Specifically, I visit terminal care wards and bring arrangements to patients who are in their final days." Ellen felt her heart skip a beat. "You bring flowers to dying patients?" "Yes, I've learned that when someone is facing death, beauty becomes even more precious. But hospital flower arrangements are expensive, and many families are already overwhelmed with medical costs." "How do you choose which patients to visit?" Sarah's expression became more emotional. "I talk to the nursing staff. They tell me about patients who don't have many visitors, or whose families are struggling financially, or who seem particularly frightened or sad. I make arrangements specifically for them." Ellen made a decision that would transform this conversation into something much more profound. "Sarah, would you come down here and tell us more about this?" Sarah made her way down to the stage, and Ellen noticed how she moved with the gentle grace of someone who had spent years creating delicate arrangements and comforting grieving people. Once they were seated in the interview area, Ellen asked the question that would reveal the full scope of Sarah's nighttime mission. "Sarah, how long have you been doing this?" 8 years now. I started after my mother died of cancer. During her final weeks in the hospital, I watched how much joy she got from the few flower arrangements people brought her. But I also noticed how many patients had no flowers at all." Ellen leaned forward. "That must have been incredibly difficult for you." "It was, but it was also enlightening. I realized that in our final moments we're all equal. We all deserve beauty, comfort, and the knowledge that someone cares about us." "How often do you visit hospitals?" Sarah looked down at her hands. "Every night, Monday through Sunday. I close my shop at 6 p.m., make arrangements from the day's leftover flowers, and visit 3 different hospitals." Ellen felt her amazement growing. "Every single night for 8 years?" "Yes, I've never missed a night unless I was physically unable to go." Ellen stood up and walked to her desk, returning with a folder that her producers had somehow managed to compile during their conversation. "Sarah, while we've been talking, my team has been making some calls. Do you know that you're famous in the LA hospital community?" Sarah looked surprised. "Famous?" Ellen opened the folder. "We talked to nursing staff at 5 different hospitals, and they all know about the flower fairy. That's what they call you." Sarah's eyes widened. "They have a name for me?" Ellen began reading from her notes. This is from a head nurse at Cedars-Sinai. The flower fairy has brought hope to our terminal care ward for years. Patients ask about her, families are moved to tears by her kindness, and staff members look forward to her visits almost as much as the patients do. She flipped to another page, and this from Children's Hospital. When terminally ill children receive flowers from the flower fairy, their entire demeanor changes. They feel special, valued, remembered. These arrangements often become the focal point of the room, bringing beauty to incredibly difficult circumstances. Sarah was listening with tears forming in her eyes. Ellen continued, "But the most remarkable thing we learned is this. Over 8 years visiting 3 hospitals every night, you've delivered flower arrangements to over 10,000 terminal patients." Sarah gasped. 10,000? 10,000 people in their final days received beauty, comfort, and the knowledge that someone cared about them because of your generosity. Ellen sat back down. "Sarah, this isn't just kindness, this is a calling." "I just think everyone deserves flowers," Sarah said simply. "Death is frightening and sad enough without it also being ugly." Ellen felt tears building in her eyes. "Sarah, tell me about some of the patients you visited." Sarah's face immediately softened with obvious love. There was Eleanor, an 89-year-old woman who had outlived all her family and friends. She hadn't had a visitor in weeks when I brought her a bouquet of pink roses. She told me they reminded her of her wedding day 70 years ago. Ellen leaned forward, completely absorbed in Sarah's storytelling. And there was Michael, a 45-year-old father of 3 who was dying of ALS. When I brought him sunflowers, he cried and said they reminded him of the field behind his childhood home where he used to play with his brothers. How do patients react when you visit them? Most are surprised first, then overwhelmed with gratitude. They can't believe a stranger would think of them. But what touches me most is when they start talking about the flowers, sharing memories, telling stories about gardens they used to tend or bouquets they once received. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. The flowers become a bridge to conversation, to connection, to remembering that their lives had beauty and meaning. Ellen felt her heart swelling with admiration for this woman's dedication. "Sarah, what made you start leaving the arrangements anonymously?" "I didn't want it to be about me or my business. I wanted it to be about the gift itself, pure beauty given freely. So I started signing the cards from the flower fairy and leaving them while patients were sleeping or out for tests." Ellen stood up again. "Sarah, I want you to meet some people." From the wings of the stage walked a group that made Sarah's face immediately change, a mixture of recognition, surprise, and deep emotion. They were people of various ages, but all carried themselves with the careful gratitude of those who had faced loss and found unexpected grace. "Sarah, these are family members of patients you visited over the years," Ellen announced. The first to approach was a woman in her 60s who immediately embraced Sarah with obvious emotion. "You're the flower fairy," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You brought daisies to my husband Robert during his final week. He talked about those flowers every day until he passed." Sarah hugged her back, tears flowing freely. "I remember Robert. He told me daisies were your favorite flower, and he wanted to make sure you knew he was thinking of you." A younger man stepped forward next. "Sarah, I'm David Chen. You brought roses to my mother during her final days at UCLA Medical. Mom had always loved roses, but we couldn't afford the expensive hospital arrangements." Sarah's eyes lit up with recognition. "Your mother Linda. She told me about her rose garden and how she missed tending to her flowers." David turned to address the studio audience. "My mother died 3 days after Sarah's visit. But during those 3 days, she talked constantly about the beautiful roses and the angel who had brought them. Sarah gave my mother dignity and beauty in her final moments." One by one, family members shared how Sarah's flowers had brought comfort, sparked conversations, and created precious final memories with their loved ones. But Ellen had arranged something that would show Sarah the even broader impact of her work. "Sarah, these families represent just a fraction of the people you've touched. But there's something else you should know." Ellen walked over to her desk and returned with more papers. "We contacted hospital administrators and asked them about the impact of your visits on their facilities." Sarah looked curious and slightly apprehensive. Ellen began reading. "This is from the head of palliative care at Cedars-Sinai. The flower fairy's visits have measurably improved patient morale, family satisfaction, and staff spirits. Patients who receive her flowers show improved emotional states and often have more meaningful final conversations with their families." She flipped to another page. "And this from Children's Hospital. Terminal pediatric patients who receive flowers from the flower fairy demonstrate reduced anxiety, improved appetite, and better engagement with family members. The flowers create a sense of normalcy and beauty in an otherwise clinical environment. Sarah was staring at Ellen in amazement. They've been studying this? Sarah, you've been providing what medical professionals are calling beauty therapy. You've proven that aesthetic interventions can improve quality of life for terminal patients. Ellen handed Sarah one of the documents. This is a research proposal from UCLA Medical School. They want to study your model and potentially implement flower fairy programs at hospitals nationwide. Sarah was reading the document with tears streaming down her face. But Ellen had more surprises. Sarah, there's someone else who wants to meet you. From the audience stood a distinguished woman in medical scrubs who walked onto the stage. Sarah, this is Dr. Maria Rodriguez, Director of Palliative Care at UCLA Medical Center, Ellen said as the woman approached. Dr. Rodriguez sat down with Ellen and Sarah. Sarah, what you've been doing represents the best of what we call whole-person care in palliative medicine. You've understood instinctively that healing isn't just about treating disease, it's about nurturing the human spirit. Sarah looked stunned to be meeting such a high-ranking medical professional. We'd like to work with you to formalize what you've been doing, Dr. Rodriguez continued. We want to create an official flower therapy program, with you as the director, that would bring beauty interventions to terminal patients throughout our medical system. Ellen watched this conversation with growing excitement. The position would come with a full salary, benefits, and a budget to expand your flower deliveries to reach even more patients, Dr. Rodriguez explained. You'd work with our medical teams to identify patients who would benefit most from your interventions. Sarah stared at Dr. Rodriguez. You want to make this my official job? Sarah, what you've been doing in your free time, at your own expense, has been more effective than many of our traditional interventions. We want to support you in doing it on a larger scale. Ellen couldn't contain her excitement. Sarah, do you understand what's happening? Your after-hours charity work is becoming a medical program that could help patients throughout Los Angeles. Sarah looked around at all the families who had come to thank her, at Dr. Rodriguez, at Ellen, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered. I just wanted people to have flowers when they were dying, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ellen stood up and made a statement that would encapsulate everything Sarah's story represented. Sarah Mitchell thought she was just a florist who delivered flowers to terminal patients. But what she actually is a healer who understood that beauty is medicine, that comfort can be cultivated, and that love can be arranged in a bouquet. But Ellen had one final revelation that would show Sarah the true legacy of her work. Sarah, there's one more person I want you to meet. A young woman in her 20s stepped forward from the group of visitors, approaching with obvious emotion and purpose. Sarah, I'm Jessica Martinez. You probably don't remember me, but you changed my life when I was 16. Sarah looked at Jessica carefully, trying to place her. My grandmother was dying of pancreatic cancer at City of Hope. She had been there for 3 weeks, and our family was devastated. We felt so helpless, watching her suffer. Jessica's voice grew stronger as she continued. Then one morning, we found the most beautiful arrangement of gardenias on her bedside table. There was a card that said, "From the Flower Fairy, and you are loved and remembered." Sarah's eyes began to fill with tears as she started to remember. My grandmother loved gardenias. They reminded her of her mother's garden in Mexico. When she saw those flowers, she smiled for the first time in weeks. Jessica turned to address the studio audience. But here's the most important part. Seeing that a complete stranger had thought to bring my grandmother beauty in her final days, it restored my faith in human goodness. It showed me that even in our darkest moments, there are people in the world who care about bringing light. She turned back to Sarah. Sarah, that experience inspired me to become a nurse. I just graduated from nursing school, and I start work in the pediatric oncology ward next month. I want to bring the same kind of unexpected kindness to sick children that you brought to my grandmother. Sarah was sobbing now, overwhelmed by learning how her simple act of kindness had influenced someone's entire career path. Ellen felt tears streaming down her own face. Sarah, do you understand what Jessica is telling us? Your flowers didn't just comfort her grandmother. They inspired a future nurse who will now bring healing to countless children. Jessica added, Sarah, you taught me that healing isn't just about medicine. Sometimes it's about showing people that they matter, that they're worth someone's time and care and effort. Ellen addressed the studio audience. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're witnessing is the true power of compassion. Sarah thought she was bringing flowers to dying patients, but she was actually planting seeds of kindness that have grown into careers dedicated to healing, families comforted in their darkest hours, and a medical program that will bring beauty to thousands more patients. She turned to Sarah one final time. "Sarah, you've proven that sometimes the most important medicine isn't found in a pharmacy. Sometimes it's found in a flower shop, arranged with love and delivered with the simple message that every life deserves beauty, especially in its final chapters." As the show wrapped up, Sarah was surrounded by the families she had comforted, the medical professionals she had inspired, and Jessica, whose career path had been shaped by witnessing Sarah's kindness. 6 months later, the Flower Fairy program had been implemented at 12 hospitals throughout Los Angeles. Sarah worked with medical teams to identify patients who would benefit most from beauty interventions, and a team of volunteer florists helped her create arrangements for over 200 patients each week. Jessica Martinez had indeed started work in pediatric oncology and had begun her own program of bringing small potted plants to children's rooms, teaching them to care for something beautiful during their treatment. And every evening when Sarah finished her rounds at various hospitals, she carried with her the knowledge that her mother's death had not been in vain. It had opened her eyes to the healing power of beauty and inspired her to ensure that no one had to face their final days without something lovely to remind them that they were valued, remembered, and loved. Because Sarah had learned something that changed how she thought about flowers and life, that the most important arrangements aren't the ones we create for celebrations, but the ones we bring to people who need to be reminded that beauty exists even in the midst of sorrow, and that someone somewhere cares enough to make sure they don't face darkness alone.